Welcome to another episode of the Yinning at Life podcast. I'm your host, Kimberley Roberts of SolefulYin, and I am super stoked to be here. I just want to say that this is potentially going to be a really emotional episode, probably on my part, but it also might be on your part too. So just a little warning in advance before I start this. I am going to be talking about death. And so if this is something that triggers you, I want to give you the space to have the discernment whether or not you fully listen to this whole episode, okay? I'm certainly not intending to trigger anybody by this, but more to bring some awareness and to educate you on life and what happens. And so in this episode, I'm going to be sharing with you something that happened to me, and it was very recent, actually. It was last week, and it had a really profound effect on me, but in a way that I, quite frankly, was really taken back by. Like, I was like, holy shit, like, this is not how I expected to react. And now that I look back at it in hindsight, because that's what I always do, is I look back at it, because I truly believe that everything that happens for us and never to us. So when I look back at what happened, I'm like, this totally happened for me, and I am so grateful for it. So anyways, I want to begin. Okay. So last Thursday, my mother phoned me and she said, your uncle passed away. And I was like, oh, like, I was saddened by it, but we weren't close anymore. So I hadn't seen him in probably about, I want to say 20 years ago. Like, it's been a really long time since I've seen him. He was very introverted, didn't, like to be around a lot of people. He was my father's brother. And so we were never close, like, even when I was a child and he used to come over for, like, family events and gatherings and that sort of thing. We were never close, but that was really the only time that I really saw him. Like, I spent more time with my other uncles than I did with him. And so I was really saddened that he had passed away. And then my mom said, well, she's like, this is the really sad part. And I was like, what's that? And she said, he passed away on November 25th last year. And I was like, what? I said, he died last year? She said, yes. And I said, and you're just finding out now? And she said, yes. She goes, the police phoned me today. And I said, the police? She said, the police phoned because where he was living, he hadn't paid his rent in 2 months. And apparently the landlord just kept slipping notes under the door, but obviously he, wasn't responding to them because he had passed away. And then finally, like, January rolled around, he still hadn't paid his rent. And so the landlord was, starting to get worried, because he's like, this tenant has been here for like 30 plus years and always paid the rent, had a good government paying job. He was retired. So, like, there wasn't any financial issue that the landlord could think of. So anyways, he put a notice under the door, like, notice of entry, we're coming in 48 hours. And so the 48 hours went by and there was no response. So anyways, landlord went in and my uncle had passed away. So then he phoned the police. And of course, my mom, being the only living, I guess, relative. I mean, she wasn't a blood relative, like, she was, it was my father's brother. So she was the only person that was left, because my father has passed away and my uncle never married and never had children. So that's when I got off the phone, I thought, first of all, that is just awful that he passed away then, and we're just finding out now. Like, and again, I hope I don't trigger anybody by this, but I'll tell you, it triggered me in a way that I didn't expect. It wasn't that I was like horrified at the fact that, you know, his body has been there this whole time, because I'll tell you, I've been in cadaver labs, I've seen, you know, decomposed bodies, I've seen dead bodies, like I've seen skeletal systems, like that doesn't have any effect on me. But for me, what it was he died alone. And so that triggered in me, the feeling of not being loved and worthy enough that someone would be there for me when I die. And you see, this dates back to childhood. This is a childhood wound of mine where I didn't feel loved and I didn't feel worthy. And that had nothing to do with my parents. Like, my parents were incredible. They did everything that parents could do, you know. But for me, I was, and I'm going to get really vulnerable here, so this is where things might get a little messy. So I was conceived out of wedlock, so my parents weren't married. My parents were Catholic. My mom, very strict Catholic, but I guess not strict enough. No judgment there, no judgment at all. And so anyways, so my parents, they had planned to get married. But anyways, they just started the honeymoon a little bit early, and they got pregnant with me. So I was planned, but you see, in my mind, I didn't think I was, like, when I found out, and I'll tell you, I didn't find out until like I was in my late 30s. So I just happened to be having a brunch with my family. And my mom was talking about, oh, well, if your father would have been alive today, like, it would have been our 40th wedding anniversary. And I thought, 40th wedding anniversary? Wait a minute. I'm going to be 40 this year. I'm going to be 40 in July. And my parents were married in February. So I was like, wait a minute. I'm like, so you guys got married in February and I was born in July. And she's like, yes. And I went, and everybody around the table, their forks dropped because everybody had figured it out. And I was like, so you got pregnant before you got married? And my mom was like, yes. Now, my father had passed away, so he wasn't there. But apparently my mom had told me this was something that my father never wanted me to know, because it wasn't that he was ashamed that I'm here. It wasn't that. He was ashamed that, you know, in the Catholic Church, you don't get pregnant before you get married. But then again, you're not supposed to have sex before you're married either. So, oh no, I don't really know how to respond to that part of it, because I'm just like, well, we're all human, right? But we're also talking many, many, many years ago. So things were a lot different than they are now, right? But back then, you were not supposed to have sex until you got married. So I figured it out. I was like, oh, all right. So I was conceived before you were married. So in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm not planned. I wasn't planned. Like, usually you get married, you get the house, you have the job, the white picket fence, you know, and it's like this. Kids. But I was like, so I said to my mom, right, like, so I wasn't planned. And she looked at me, and my mom never gets defensive, right? Like, she's pretty chill. She's like, you were so planned. She's like, don't you ever think that you were not planned? And I was just like, whoa. So that made me actually feel like I was definitely not planned, right? But I understand it was emotional for her, and emotional for her to relive that, but also because in her mind, she knew exactly what I was going through. The fact that I wasn't planned. And if I wasn't planned, then that means I wasn't loved, and that I'm not worthy of being here, right? Again, our parents just do the best that they can with the tools that they have. And so there's no judgment here from me. I'm not even upset. I do believe that the universe brings us into this world for a reason and at a very specific time. So I was meant to be here when I was, otherwise I wouldn't be here. So there was that. And then when I was 5, I actually vividly remember this, oddly enough. I was in kindergarten, I was at school, and it was lunchtime and we were playing outside. And my mom was at home and she had just had my sister, because we're like just shy apart of 5 years. And so my mom was taking care of my sister, but she was also babysitting 2 kids too. So she was kind of like running a daycare type thing, to bring in the money while she was also on mat leave. And so I went to school, and I guess I had a thought in my mind, why is my mom home with all these kids and I'm here? Like, I don't like that. I want to be at home. So I walked home. Now, I lived, like, I had to take the school bus to go to school. So it wasn't like a quick jaunt around the corner to get to school. It was actually like a 45-minute walk. And I walked through the forest, which was probably, I mean, back then it was safe, but today I would definitely, at a 5-year-old, not walk through a forest all by yourself. So there I was, I trucked myself home and I walked in the door, and my mom turned and looked at me and she's like, the school phoned, they have no idea where you've been. They thought you were kidnapped or something happened to you. I've been freaking out. We were calling the police. What on earth were you thinking? And I just looked up at her and I was like, I wanted to be home with you. Of course, my mom started crying. And then of course my dad runs in the door because my mom called him. And, so my parents did get a little bit upset with me about that, but that's why. And I'll tell you, the reason down deep inside of me for wanting to be at home was because when my mom first had me, and again, I wasn't quote unquote, I didn't come at the time that it was planned for them, right? So my mom had to go back to work pretty much right after I was born. And so my grandmother really took care of me for the first few years. And so it's not that my mom wasn't around, but she certainly wasn't around like how a mom typically is around when a baby is born, right? So there was that. And then when I was a few months older, my parents had moved my crib from their bedroom into my own bedroom. And I was a really fussy baby. I didn't like to go to bed because I didn't like to not be around my parents. I didn't like the fact, apparently, I don't know, I don't remember this part, but apparently I didn't like the idea that I was being taken out of my parents' room. Again, probably on a very deep subconscious level, there was that feeling of not being wanted, not being loved, right? Now we're moving you into a different room away from us. So I went to bed. And my parents went into their bedroom and they went to sleep. And of course, I was crying, right? So my mom would run into the room and, coddle me and take care of me. And then I'd fall back asleep. And then she'd go back into her room. And this happened like for a long time. Like she would put me to bed and I would cry and I would cry. And my mom would run in there and, take care of me like a mom does, soothe me, and then eventually go back to bed. Well, one night I was crying. And my dad said to my mom, she's got to learn. She's going to be okay. She is okay, but she's got to learn to fall asleep on her own. And my mom's like, I can't, like she's crying, like I need to go to her. And my dad's like, you've got to let her learn. So of course my mom listened to my dad. 3 hours later, I'm still crying, right? 3 hours, apparently. I don't remember this, but my mom remembers this because she tells me this story every year on my birthday. She's like, you were crying for 3 hours. And I'm like, 3 hours? I said, you didn't go in sooner? And she goes, I wanted to, but your father kept telling me you're okay. And I'm like, 3 hours? Like, that's a long fucking time to be crying. So finally, my parents couldn't take it anymore. So they ran into the bedroom and I had fallen through my crib and the crib was on top of me. So I couldn't get out, I was trapped. And no one was coming there to save me. So again, another instance of not loved, not worthy. And again, no judgment, no resentment, no anger towards my parents at all. Like shit happens. I was okay. I mean, like they did take me to the hospital and make sure everything was all right. And I wasn't injured. I didn't even have a bruise on me. So, but in my mind, it was just yet another stab at, I'm not loved and I'm not worthy. So circling back throughout my life from then to now, there's been this wound of not feeling loved and not feeling worthy. And then going through an abusive marriage to an alcoholic, and then him eventually, having an affair with a cocaine addict. God, I sound like I should be creating a movie out of this. Like, this is like something you'd read in a book or watch on a movie, right? But you know what? This is life. And I'm going to tell you, like, everybody has their life, right? Like, we're human beings living in a human experience in this thing called life. And so it's not rose-colored glasses 24 hours a day, 365, 24, right? Like, it's just not. Like, shit happens in life. And so, but this is my life. This is what happened. So this wound really hit me hard when my uncle passed away, and there was nobody there because he lived by himself and he didn't really have a lot of people in his life. So of course, in my mind, especially my ego, started to come up saying, well, you know what? That's going to be you. You're going to end up like living alone and dying and nobody being there. And, somebody finding your body like 2 months later. Like, and I get why my ego was doing that. It was just trying to keep me safe and trying to keep me from experiencing that pain, but it came up. And so as I started to contemplate like why I was so upset, I started to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And when I did, it was like, I need to heal this. This needs to be healed. Like, this really does need to be healed, this wound. Because for one thing, it's not even true. Like, there's not even a remote possibility that this is true. But it keeps coming up. So I kind of had, this was last Thursday, so I kind of had a bit of a breakdown after that, like literally a mental and emotional breakdown, even a little bit of a physical breakdown, if I'm really being honest with you. I was exhausted. I was supposed to work that afternoon and I was supposed to work the next day. And I was like, I can't, like, I just cannot be of service to my patients and to my students with the way that I'm feeling right now. Like, I would be doing them a disservice. So, I didn't explain the whole story, but I did explain. I said there was a death in the family. I need time, right? Nobody upset about this, like everyone checking up on me. I'm so grateful for that. I took time away from social media as well. And I was just like, this is coming up. This wound is coming up. And I started to realize that this wound has been coming up over and over and over again in my life, but also in my business too. And so this wound has literally been sabotaging me. So if you're not aware of how your ego works, your ego is that primal part of your brain that's just always trying to keep you safe, right? And safe to the ego is not always just like the bear standing in front of you waiting to make filet mignon out of you. Like, any experience that you have that creates like a heightened emotional state, like the ego remembers that stuff. And so when you get triggered by something, and I'll tell you, like, my uncle's death was a trigger, right? So it triggered the original wound of not feeling love. So then my ego is coming in. I want you to think of the ego as like this big, this big armored guy coming in to save the day, like the soldier on the white horse kind of speak, right? And so coming in to save you. And what it does is the ego will put up these shields, these defenses that you and then work with to basically avoid more pain. So I'll give you a perfect example of what my shields or my ego defenses come up. So after I get triggered, my ego flares, it goes crazy, and it's like, oh my God, yeah, you're not loved. See what happens, blah, 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 blah. And then as a result of that, how I respond is, for one thing, I start to get very pessimistic and very doubtful. I literally start to overanalyze everything and every thought that I have, to the point where it literally paralyzes me. Like I'm stuck. Like I can't move. I can't make a decision. And then my liver and gallbladder meridian channels get really clogged and kinked and pissed off because I'm sitting there in this indecisiveness, and there's this anger and this frustration that's brewing underneath me. And if you know anything about TCM, about traditional Chinese medicine, all of our organs hold emotions, right? And we have these meridian channels that flow through our body, and the energy flows through these channels, and it can get kinked up. So I'm like, I overanalyze, and then I get pessimistic and doubtful. And pretty much doubt, as you know, kills everything, right? So this was having an effect in my personal life, but also having an effect in my business as well. Not feeling worthy and loved, like when I would put out, and I'm being totally vulnerable here, I would put out like offers of like incredible courses and master classes, and like nobody would buy. And or I would put out an incredible offer with my reflexology practice, and nobody would book. And so every time that would happen, I would get triggered again with this wound of not feeling loved and not feeling worthy. And then the ripple effect of the, overanalyzing and the pessimistic vibe, this is just how I respond, right? Then emotionally, okay? So emotionally, if you think about it, when you start to overanalyze things, you get overwhelmed, right? Then you get worried, you get confused. Then you start to get scared. And this all has an effect on the organ systems in your body and the corresponding meridian channels. So if I go back to last Thursday, when I literally had the meltdown, all I could feel in my body was fear and extreme sadness and frustration. So right there, I knew, okay, frustration, I got to work on liver. I'm stuck in this like energy of like, I can't get rid of this wound. I can't heal it. So indecisiveness, like gallbladder. Okay. All right. Fear. Ooh, yeah. Kidneys. Got to work kidneys. Kidneys is fear. And I'm feeling sad. Okay. Well, what's sad? The heart. Right. And then of course, then I'm grieving, because I'm actually grieving the loss of my uncle. Even though we weren't close, he was still family. So then there's the lungs. Right. So, and then I started to worry, because I was like, oh, now I got to take time off work. Now I'm also worried about like, how am I going to support myself during this time? I was also then worried about, what if I can't heal this wound? What if it keeps coming back and the rest of my life, this wound is here? So then I realized right in that moment, I was like, okay, I've got all 5 of the primary emotions running through me all at once. And I'm like, every single meridian channel is literally like, ding, 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 like, come and save me. Like, come and save me here. And I was like, oh my God, what do I do? And I sat there in paralysis for a minute. And then I just said to myself, okay, just start by breathing deeply. Start with that. And the answers will come. So I started to do some deep diaphragmatic breathing, which for me always like chills me out and grounds me. And then I have like my people that I speak to, right? So my angels, my gods, my spirits, my grandmother is one of them. You're gonna laugh at this one. So Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, he's also part of my like, my people that I speak to. I have a mentor that I work with. And so she's part of even though she's alive, the other 2 are not, she's also part of my group. And then I have my higher self standing there too, right? Cheering me on, my number 1 fan. Or as my mom says, she's my number 1 fan. But I'm like, well, aren't I supposed to be my number 1 fan? And she goes, okay, well, then I'm your number 2 fan. But so these are my people. And so I sat there and I just said, I need help. I am so overwhelmed. I'm so flooded with so many emotions right now. I don't even know where to fucking start. And I just sat there and I'm like, please help me. Give me some guidance. Give me some insight. Give me some inspiration. Give me some fucking awareness here. I'm dying. And so all of a sudden I just sat there and I closed my eyes and I started to breathe a little bit deeper. And then all of a sudden I heard in my voice, in the back of my head, get on your mat, you know what to do. And I was like, huh? I'm like, what? Like, it was like, almost like, repeat. I'm like, get on your mat, you know what to do. So I was like, oh, yeah, I kind of do know what to do. I know I've got all these emotions running through my body. I know with all of these emotions, there's trauma, right? Like every time you get triggered from something, there's trauma that comes up. So I was like, okay, get on my mat. I know I'm dealing with all the emotions. So guess what? I got to work all the meridian channels. So I got to do all the poses, like not all the poses, but I'm like, I've got to do poses and for each one of the meridian channels, right? Kidney, liver, spleen, heart, lungs, right? Those are the yin meridian channels. And then they have their corresponding yang meridian channels, right? So you've got gallbladder, you've got small intestine, you've got the stomach, you've got the bladder, and you've got the large intestine. So I was like, hey, let's do poses. We know how to do this, Kim. Like, we teach this. Like, this is what we teach our students. We know what to do. So I was just like, hey, let's get on the mat. Got on the mat, and I was just like, I let myself go through the process of feeling all of these emotions. And I'll tell you, it wasn't fun. It was painful. And there were moments where I was like, I can't fucking do this. Like, I just don't have the strength to do this. And so I would just stop for a minute. I would just pause. And I was like, okay, let's just pause. Let's just lay on our back. Let's just pause, keep our eyes closed and breathe. We can do this. We've done this before, Kim. We can do it again. And I literally, it was almost like I was looking at a small childlike version of me saying, like, we're going to be okay. We can do this, right? But my ego in the back is like, you can't fucking do this. Like, you don't know what you're doing. Like, this isn't the way that we deal with stuff, right? We usually go to the overanalyzing and the pessimism and the doubt. That's our typical reaction and response when we get triggered. But I was like, in my conscious mind, I was like, I know what's going on here. And I'm so grateful for that awareness, because I'll tell you, without the awareness, nothing changes. And I say this in almost every single class that I teach. I say this to my students, like, nothing will change unless you have the awareness of what needs to change. And I'll tell you that your ego will try its very hardest, its best, to prevent you from creating that awareness. And it's only because it's trying to keep you safe, right? That's all it is. It's like a small, scared child screaming at you. It's basically what it is, trying to keep you safe. But the reality is that in our conscious mind, we have to use the discernment of, when am I actually not safe? Like, when am I actually being threatened? Like, my life, my livelihood is being threatened, versus like what I'm going through right now, right? With the unloved and the unworthy wound. And I'll tell you, man, I cried and I cried and I cried. And then I got angry. And then I got up off my mat and I went into the bathroom and I looked at myself in the mirror and I just started to vent and I just let it all out. And I let out the frustration and the anger and the resentment towards my late husband for, having an affair with a cocaine addict after 20, plus years of marriage. Like, that's what he does, right? But then again, it wasn't coming from a place of judgment towards him at all. But I needed to get that out, because it was obviously the wound of not feeling loved was feeling fresh, right? So I let it all out in front of the mirror. And I cried and I screamed. And then finally, I just looked at myself and I said, I don't ever want to feel like this again. Like, I don't ever want to fucking feel like this again. I'm tired of fucking feeling like this. And I was like, and then I'm going to do everything that I can to change. because I know that I am the only one who has the power to change. Nobody else is going to do that work for you. I think it's Mel Robbins who says in one of her podcast episodes, who I highly recommend if you don't watch her podcast to watch it. She says, no one is coming to save you. And that's true. And for some of you, you might be hearing that and going, well, that's just really nasty. It's not nasty, it's reality, it's the truth. Nobody is going to come and save you. And for some of you out there who have like codependency, and I have no judgment towards that if you do, because let me tell you, I was very much in a codependent relationship for a very long time. In fact, my whole marriage to my late husband was codependent, right? And that was, again, another like defense mechanism of the ego. So it's like, if you were codependent, you're going to expect somebody else to come in on that shiny white horse to pick you up and to save you. But the reality is, it's not going to fucking happen. You might get lucky every once in a while and someone might come in to help you with something. And for that, be absolutely grateful, because I'll tell you, that has happened to me a number of times where I have had people come in and save me. But the reality is, it's not their job. It's not their responsibility. And the sooner that you own up to that and you stand in your own courage, the faster you're going to heal and the less painful that healing process is going to be. The other thing I want to tell you is that, and this is a big myth, that people say that time is what heals your wounds. No, it's not. It's you. You heal them. Time has nothing to do with it. You can easily do some yin practices, some mindfulness meditation, and some energetic cord cutting, and be cleared of a wound very quickly. Some wounds, depending on how just deep they are and how long, especially if you've been living with them for decades, is going to take a lot more work. It's going to be a longer process. But you know what? I'll tell you, a lot of the times we give up because it is taking a while. Something that you've been living with, a wound that you've been living with your entire life, you're not going to clear that up in like 5 minutes. It's going to take time. But we don't have the compassion and the patience for that. And so we give up and we recoil back to believing whatever it is, right? And then we say to ourselves, well, I just need more time. It's just the time. I don't have the time. It's not the time that's healing you. It's you that's healing you. It's you. And so it's time for you to maybe take that radical responsibility for yourself. And I say, like on last Thursday, like it was radical self-acceptance for me. Self-acceptance of like what has happened in my life that I cannot change. I can't go back and I can't change any of this. All I can change is my perception of how things have played out. That's all I can do. I can't change not being conceived. I can't change not falling through the crib. I can't change being abused by my late husband. I can't change the fact that, you know, like I felt unworthy on that day and I walked home at 5 years old because my mom wasn't, you know, like there for me. Like I can't change any of that, but I can change how I perceive it, how I look at it through the lens that I look at. And now I look at it with compassion for my parents who, you know what, they were just doing the best that they could with what they knew. That was it. And I'll tell you that this is actually a bit of a funny story. So my last name is actually different from my parents. This was something I didn't figure out for many years either. Don't ask me, I don't know how, but you know, you don't really think about your parents' name. But anyways, my parents' last name is Robert. My father was very French, right? So it's Robert. My mom, very English, right? Like an English background. So when I was born, there was a lot of confusion and there was a lot of fear around it, because for one thing, I was born very premature. So I was supposed to be born at the end of October, and I was born in July. I was tiny. Like, my mom has pictures of me. I fit in the palm of her hand. Like, I was tiny, right? So there was a lot of fear of like, is this child actually going to make it? And apparently when my mom was pregnant with me, I just sat there the whole time. I never kicked. I never moved. Like, it was like I was like a Buddha in meditation, right? Which now I look back at my life and I'm like, well, like, yeah, well, that kind of fits the story, right? But so there was a lot of fear around my mom's pregnancy, but then also a lot of fear when I was born, because I was born earlier than expected. So whoever it was, the nurse, the doctor, whoever it was that wrote out the birth certificate thought, Rabea, like, that's wrong. Like, that's a mistake. Like, when they were looking at my parents' names, so they put an S at the end, Roberts. And my parents just never even thought, well, for one thing, it didn't even dawn on them for the longest time that I had a different last name, and then they just never changed it. So when I found out years later, and I found out because my mom had written me a check, and I looked at that check and I went, Robert. I'm like, our last name is Roberts. And she's like, no, she's like, your last name is Roberts. And I'm like, what? She's like, our last name is Rabea. And I'm like, and Jen, my sister, she's Robert. And I'm like, so I'm the only one that's Roberts? And my mom was like, yes. Well, how do you think I felt then in that moment? Just another stab at the, oh, unworthy, unloved, unwanted. I don't even have the same last name. Not to mention, they also fucked up the spelling of my first name. That's a whole other kettle of fish I'm not even going to go to here. I really think I'm going to have to write a book or a movie or something about this. But so it was, like, I could go back and I could resent my parents for all of this. But what is that actually going to accomplish? Nothing, other than like more suffering on my part, and also my mother carrying that burden, right? Which is not even necessary. Again, our parents do the best that they can with the tools that they have. They never abused me. I was never unwanted. I was never unloved. I was always taken care of, right? But when we're that small baby and that child, we look up to the parents to do everything and to be everything for us, right? And we hold them high on this pedestal. And so all I could do now is change my perception of everything and realize that I actually am loved and I am worthy. And I'm actually surprised I haven't completely lost it in this episode yet with the tears. But if I had recorded this podcast last week, I'll tell you, I definitely would not have been able to get through it, because it was just, there was too much rawness still at that point, right? Like, the wound was still just very, very fresh. So all to say that, like, it's incredible what our body holds, how we view experiences in our life, and how our mind looks at things, and then the reality of what our life ends up being as a result of all of that. Like, I can tell you, I can look back through my entire life, and some of the decisions that I've made, again, this is all through a lens of compassion and love for myself, but I look back and I go, yeah, that totally makes sense why I responded that way, or why I made that decision, because of that wound, right? Of that feeling of not being loved and worthy and wanted. And so now I look at everything from a lens of being inquisitive. Like, when I think a certain way, I'll be like, instead of being judgmental against myself, I'll be like, why do I think that? Like, what's to that thought? And I'll tell you that we create our belief systems based on the thoughts that we just have over and over and over again, based on a lot of the times the experiences that we have, right? And so I look at like my life and my business now, and it just all makes sense. It's almost like I've put the entire puzzle together and I'm staring down at it and I'm like, oh, and the light bulb is over it. And I'm like, this is so clear now. And this is so empowering because I can change, because I have the awareness now. And not only do I have the awareness, but now I've always had the tools, right? Acupressure, reflexology, breath work, meditation, and yin yoga. Those are my 5 pillars. Those are my 5 tools that I always gravitate to. But I'll tell you, when you have the tools plus the awareness, then you are literally like healing at rapid speeds. Or you can if you choose to. But you got to do the work. You got to pick yourself up. You got to be your number 1 fan. You got to be your biggest cheerleader. And you got to stop holding the victim card. And I say that with so much love, because I'll tell you, I held that victim card for a long fucking time. And it didn't serve me. And I know it doesn't serve me now. And so this is why I say, like, the radical acceptance, the radical self-acceptance came after a death. Yeah. Radical self-acceptance after a death. And it all happened for me. It didn't happen to me, it happened for me. And for that, I am so grateful. Because now I can truly move forward. Even though I know my ego's going to be right beside me, I've radically accepted myself. And for that, I'm really proud. So thank you so much for watching this episode. If you're on YouTube, if you were on Spotify, thanks so much for listening, for pressing play today. I appreciate you all. I love and support you all. Thank you so much for being in my life. And if you want to connect with me, all the resources are there. You can check them out. And if you're not sure where to start, you can always hit that DM button and send me a message and let me know, what do you need help with? So I'm here to help you create that yinning it life vibe. So have a great rest of your day.